Hey everyone, welcome to Logan's Mosh Pit. Glad to have you here. Do me a favor and please subscribe if you haven't already. Also consider joining my Patreon page for some cool perks. I'll leave a link in the description. Gather round, bookworms, because the time has come for a new episode of Rock and Read. Today we'll read Chapter 9 of Runnin With The Devil, written by Van Halen's manager, Noel Monk. Chapter 9 is called Alien Attack. Here we go. Whatever concessions to time and creativity might have been made in the studio, they had little impact on the public reception to Van Halen II. While critical response was generally positive, if not quite as warm as it was for the debut album, fans scooped up Van Halen II so quickly that Warner's faith in the band was immediately validated. Within a month, the album was certified gold. Within 2 months, it was platinum. It peaked at number 6 on the Billboard album chart and has sold more than 5 million copies to date, in part because of the popularity of the first single. More pop than metal, Dance the Night Away is one of those songs that sounds absolutely great coming out of a car radio or a high-end stereo system. With its hummable melody, sing-along chorus inspired by Fleetwood Mac's Go Your Own Way, and just enough of Edwards' guitar flourishes to remind the listener that this was indeed a rock band. Dance the Night Away reached number 15 on the singles charts, but more importantly introduced the band to a broader audience. Van Halen was no longer just a hard rock band, but a band that knew how to write and record songs filled with killer hooks and vocals. They were accessible. Most of all, they were fun. Dance the Night Away, after all, was a song inspired by the sight of a free-spirited young woman having sex with her boyfriend in the parking lot of a club while the band looked on. She later spent the night dancing in the club with her jeans on backwards, which amused the boys to no end. David wrote the lyrics as he always did. This was his way of looking at things. He saw humor and titillation in virtually everything. And of course, these were common musical refrains throughout the David Lee Roth era. Get drunk, get laid, have a party. Really though, it always came back to the live performance, and Van Halen in '79 was even tighter and better than it was in the first year. In some ways, the World Vacation Tour, as the '79 tour was known, was a transitional period for Van Halen, as they made the adjustment from supporting act to headliner. Set lists were expanded from 40 minutes to an hour or more. Our Spartan road crew mushroomed to nearly 40 people, including 24 technical staff and a security team. We employed 3 massive 44-foot trucks to haul more than 20 tons of sound equipment and 10 tons of lighting. We traveled in custom coaches and on planes. If this paled in comparison to the bloated traveling circus we would become in a few more years, it was nonetheless a mind-boggling advance for a band that just 1 year earlier had been bouncing around the rutted back roads of England in an old commercial bus. Overnight, it seemed, we went from plastic spoons to gold-plated ones. And you know what? If that sounds like fun, well, it was. But it was also hard work. More than 100 performances in North America, Europe, and Asia, in a span of slightly more than 5 months. As manager, my job entailed much more than simply making sure the band got from one date to another, and that each show went off without a hitch. The way I saw it, I was responsible for practically everything, and that included repairing some relationships that had been damaged under the previous regime. Specifically, I'm talking about the Warner Brothers secretaries who had been traumatized by viewing Marshall's Van Halen videos. They hadn't asked to see these videos, and they certainly didn't expect the wet and wild antics they witnessed. More than once after that incident, I had walked through the offices and been confronted by a secretary who told me how much they liked me and appreciated my professionalism. But I really don't care for your band. Those guys are disgusting. What could I say? That such hijinks were perfectly normal for a successful rock band? That life on the road naturally provoked one's worst tendencies? That none of us had any idea the videos would even surface? And certainly not in the presence of an unwitting female audience. In the offices of our record label, no less. All this would have been true and yet woefully insufficient as an explanation. There was no excuse. But maybe an apology coupled with a gesture of goodwill and friendship could ease the sting. On April 8, 1979, just the fifth date on the tour, Van Halen took part in the California World Music Festival at the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum, a 90,000-seat outdoor stadium that at the time was home to both the University of Southern California and Los Angeles Rams football teams. The two-day festival featured nearly 20 bands playing for nearly as many hours. Van Halen was co-headliner with Aerosmith on the second day. Heady stuff for a band whose members just 1 year earlier probably would have been willing to pay for tickets to get a chance to see the likes of Cheap Trick, REO Speedwagon, and Ted Nugent. To say nothing of Aerosmith, a band like Van Halen, built around a charismatic, somewhat androgynous lead singer, Steven Tyler, and a brilliant guitar player, Joe Perry, and a band that David, and Edward in particular, had grown up admiring. Now, here they were, sharing top billing with that same band, and playing for a fee of approximately $75,000. 6 months earlier, they had been sweating it out in smaller venues all over the world for $750, and happy to get it. This is how far Van Halen had come in a ridiculously short time. Since the show was in our backyard, the audience included a couple hundred personally invited guests, friends, family members, industry executives. I made sure that the VIP list included all the secretaries in the Warner Brothers Burbank office, and that their experience would be one they wouldn't soon forget, but this time in a good way. We were working at the time with a company called Pure Pleasure Limousines. I love that name. So I called my friend Vern, who ran the company, and asked if he could arrange to have several limousines take care of the secretaries we had invited to the show. Probably 10 or 11 secretaries, and I want each of them to be able to bring a guest, I said. I just want to make sure that they have a great time. I want a separate limo for each couple, and I want them picked up at their homes. No problem, Noel, he said. We'll take care of them. One other thing, I added. I want all the limos to be white. There was a pause. I'm not sure we can get that many white limos on such short notice, he said. But we'll try. I arranged everything before running it by the band, and they approved everything, naturally. A couple of days before the show, several of the secretaries came to me and offered to simplify the process by meeting at the Warner offices, where they could be picked up as a group. I balked. Listen, that's not what a limo is for, I said. A limo is so you can go to the show, get up, fall into your limo, and be driven home. That's the whole point, to be pampered and have fun. Well, when you put it that way, the ladies had a terrific time. I was sure most of them had never been in a limousine before, and everything about the day was handled in an elegant, first-class manner. I wanted to change their opinion about the band. I wanted them to know that they were actually nice, fun-loving kids whose trust had been betrayed, and that together we would always treat everyone at Warner Brothers with respect and dignity. It was my opinion that the secretaries in both Burbank and New York were instrumental to our success. More important, they did hard and often tedious work that was often overlooked and undervalued. I wanted them to know we appreciated their efforts. So they traveled to the show by limo. They sat in a special section and had full backstage access. And I arranged for the limos to be festooned with roses and stocked with plenty of champagne and candy. They were all appropriately impressed and grateful. Thanks so much, Noel, they all said, to which I replied, don't thank me. It was the band's idea. Really? Absolutely. They're a nice bunch of guys, and they feel terrible about what happened last year. At the end of the day, everyone felt a little better about Van Halen, including the band members themselves. This, too, was a manager's job, to repair the relationships that invariably fray as a band climbs the ladder of success, often oblivious of the people who get trampled along the way. But it was also a practical gesture. Secretaries were the gatekeepers to the VIPs. Without their assistance, a band could be derailed at any moment. At the very least, their support would make my job easier. So, it became standard practice that whenever Van Halen played a big show in LA or New York, the Warner Brothers secretaries received special transportation and VIP privileges. I always considered it money well spent. It made people happy and my life easier. As for the California World Music Festival itself, while it wasn't Van Halen's first performance in the World Vacation Tour, it served as an unofficial kickoff in that most of the music industry was watching. And the band not only performed flawlessly and energetically, but demonstrated the flair for fun-loving self-promotion that I had seen from the outset. There were more eyes on them this time around. Backstage visitors would have witnessed the usual bantering, self-medicating, and pre-show ball busting, as well as the presence of politically incorrect guests representing questionable taste, including a pair of little people wearing black bowler hats and t-shirts emblazoned with the words Van Halen Security, and a chimpanzee dressed like David Lee Roth. As if this scene weren't enough, once again David had devised an interesting stunt to punctuate Van Halen's entrance into a major music festival. Throughout the day, a yellow Volkswagen Beetle was parked on a grassy area near the stage. Periodically, an announcer would bellow over the public address system something about the car belonging to Aerosmith and asking the band to please move it. The joke behind all this was that David thought it would be hilarious for the band to enter the Coliseum in a Sherman tank and crush the Aerosmith Volkswagen en route to that stage. Then the guys would jump out and play their set, thereby kicking Aerosmith's ass both musically and symbolically. We even did a test run the day before the festival with a professional driver operating the tank and the boys going along for the ride. They seemed to be pumped about it. Personally, I worried that something could go wrong either with the actual stunt or with the rush to the stage down a flight of approximately 100 stairs that would follow. Hell, Alex had managed to sprain his ankle without even jumping out of a plane. This time, they would actually be in the stunt vehicle. As it turned out, David pulled the plug on the whole thing the following day, when he learned that Aerosmith had apparently gotten wind of the plan and might be plotting some sort of counterattack. So the tank remained on the premises, under a tarp, and the Volkswagen sat there all day, without explanation, save for the announcements over the PA system, which, without context, must have seemed pretty ridiculous to the sweat-soaked throng at the Coliseum. Not that they would have cared. Hell, with Aerosmith and Van Halen at the top of the bill, they more than got their money's worth. The European leg of the World Vacation Tour lasted a mere 2 weeks at the end of June, but it came right on the heels of 3 months of practically non-stop touring in North America. A few days off would have been nice prior to returning to the States for another leg, but as the band was discovering with stardom and success came greater expectations and responsibilities. I was lounging on my bed in London, which was sort of my office away from home, when the phone rattled me out of an endless stream of thoughts about business, mayhem, and promotion. When I picked up the phone, I instantly recognized the voice on the other end as that of Tom Ruffino, head of the international department at Warner Brothers. More than just a capable business associate, Tom was a good friend. I enjoyed working with him and appreciated everything he had done to help make Van Halen more than just a domestic success, including sending the band overseas on several occasions for both promotional and video work to advance our foreign presence. Tom was very much a big picture kind of guy, and you ignored his advice at your own peril. That said, I could tell by the tone of his voice in the late hour of the call that the break between tour legs was about to be cut short, and that one or more of us would likely be heading to some location other than Los Angeles. "Things are happening," Tom said, his voice reflecting both seriousness and excitement. "Big things. I hope you have your bags packed." "They always are, Tom," I said. "What's going on?" Tom's grand plan, he explained, was for me to take 2 members of Van Halen to South Africa for a promotional visit. My stomach churned at the very thought of it. I had already turned down several lucrative offers to play in Sun City, the playground of the South African white elite, and I had no intention of going there anytime soon. South Africa at the time was a country deeply divided. A violent and repressive society, repugnant in its racial segregation and dangerously stubborn in its refusal to change. Philosophically, it was hard for me to rationalize supporting any of this, and having Van Halen play in South Africa was certainly a form of support. Moreover, it wasn't the safest place to take the band. But Tom was nothing if not persuasive. This wasn't a performance, he said, just a promotional appearance. Furthermore, Warner's South Africa division was a bastion of integration within the music industry. The company was headed by a guy named Derek Hanna, whom I had spoken to on the phone and had found to be an intelligent, knowledgeable, straight shooter. This is important, old Tom said. Van Halen is selling a lot of records in South Africa. We need to have a presence. I wasn't happy about it, but I understood Tom's point. There was a difference between playing Sun City and promoting the band to a broad and multicultural audience. I told Tom I would take care of it and hung up the phone. Now all I had to do was pitch the idea to the lads and hope that two of them would find it reasonably palatable. If not, I'd look like a rather foolish and ineffectual manager to Tom and the rest of the Warner Brothers brass. I called the band together for a quick meeting and explained what was in the works. I need 2 volunteers, I said. Who's up for it? The result was entirely predictable. David and Alex were all in. David, because he never missed an opportunity to promote both himself and the Van Halen brand, and Alex because he genuinely liked to travel and see different places. Edward, on the other hand, declined immediately. Edward still preferred the comfort and familiarity of home to life on the road. Typical of bass players, Michael was the quiet and reclusive one of the group and rarely conducted interviews. Expecting Michael to do a promotional visit to South Africa would have been unrealistic, but I threw it out there just for the sake of diplomacy. He politely declined. The next morning, David, Alex, and I boarded a flight bound for Johannesburg. As the doors of the jet closed, we looked at each other, suddenly realizing just how long the trip lay ahead, and how mysterious the destination would be. I saw that David's grip on the armrests were even tighter than usual. After having flown thousands of miles with David, I could measure the intensity of a particular journey by the whiteness of his knuckles. This one was going to be a nasty trip. Or maybe not. Alex, in his cool manner, had swept 2 bottles of vodka off the flight attendant's tray before we even taxied away from the gate. This was not uncommon for Al, and not because he needed to calm his nerves while flying. He just liked to drink. And while his hobby became a compulsion and ultimately a crippling addiction, it also at times made him an interesting traveling companion. London to Johannesburg is an 11-hour flight non-stop, so there would be plenty of time to get inebriated and still catch some rest. In fact, Al calculated this to be a 2-drunk flight, meaning there was time to get drunk, eat dinner, get some sleep, and then do it all over again before we hit the ground. We were on our first sleep when we were startled awake by the plane's rapid descent into what we would later learn was Nairobi. This was supposed to be a non-stop flight, so the interruption was surprising and somewhat alarming. Apparently, we were short on fuel, so a change in flight plan had been requested. Once on the tarmac, to our utter amazement, 2 men clad in what appeared to be hazmat suits quickly boarded the plane. I was still half asleep and more than a little tipsy as their forms came into focus. For a moment, I thought we'd been hijacked by a UFO and were about to be kidnapped. This fear only intensified when the intruders pulled out guns and began spraying the cabin with some alien mist. They moved from stern to stern with great efficiency, filling the fuselage with a thick, white cloud. We didn't have time to spit or cough, let alone voice any objection. As quickly as they had appeared, the spacemen were gone, leaving behind a couple hundred gasping passengers. Presumably, though, any uninvited guests, 6-legged or microbial, had been vanquished. So this is what it's like to be deloused, I thought. Welcome to the third world. We rapidly ascended to cruising altitude and went to work on drunk/meal/nap number 2, during which I dreamed of ways to exact revenge on Tom for sending us on this junket. Eventually, we landed in Johannesburg, where we were greeted by most of the WB staff. They were extremely friendly and enthusiastic. They were also, as Tom had promised, a remarkably diverse collection of people. The music business in those days was generally as white as Wonder Bread, so it was both encouraging and surprising to see such an integrated group. We spent 5 fabulous days working with Derek and his staff promoting the out of Van Halen. My job was short and sweet. David handled most of the interviews and photo opportunities, so there was plenty of time for me to get to know the city, which I did, with Derek as a thoughtful and informed guide. The highlight of the trip, though, came on the very first night. We were having dinner at a wonderful and boisterous restaurant. There was a 9-hour time difference between Johannesburg and Los Angeles, which meant that when we got to the restaurant at 7 o'clock p.m., it would be 10 o'clock in the morning in L.A. This was perfect, as everyone would be in the Burbank office. I explained to Derek my simple but dastardly plan to pay back Tom Ruffino for sending us on a trip that included an attack by aliens. "I love it," Derek said with a smile. "The only drawback is that I'll probably lose my job." Al and Dave were both standing nearby and listening, cocktails in hand. In his most commanding voice, Dave bellowed, "Derek, I won't let that happen. This is a must." With the plan ready, we rolled into action. Derek and I wrote the telex and sent it to L.A. It arrived in Tom's office just as he was starting his work week. His pleasant Monday morning was ruined by the following message. "Haven't heard from the group since they were taken from the plane in Nairobi. Assume you are aware of the situation. Unfortunately, we can't pay the DLRS. 10,000 bail from here because of exchange control problem. Do you have this in hand? Regards, Derek." Derek's calls were directed to the raging party going on at the restaurant where Dave, Al, and I sat at the bar and waited for the fun to begin. It didn't take long. Within minutes after sending the telex, the phone rang behind the bar. The bartender handed the receiver to Derek. In my mind's eye, I could see Tom's face reddening with panic and disbelief. Derek, meanwhile, played his part perfectly, expressing amazement and exasperation that Tom had not already gotten us out of jail and done whatever he could to rectify a rapidly worsening political nightmare. Finally, Derek could take it no longer. He started laughing, then explained to Tom that it was all a big prank and that everyone had arrived safely in Johannesburg. "Oh, and one other thing. This was all Monk's idea, so you can blame him. I just want to have a job tomorrow." With that, he handed me the phone. I could practically hear the roof rattling in Burbank. "You son of a..." Tom shouted. "Where are you? Really?" "Calm down," I said. "We're having dinner at a wonderful restaurant in Johannesburg." Tom ranted and raved for a few more minutes, but eventually he calmed down and actually started laughing. I handed the phone to Dave, then to Al, and finally back to Derek, who did indeed keep his job. This was a happy ending. We had gotten payback for the aliens and kept everyone at Warner Brothers happy by continuing to expand the Van Halen universe. I did everything in my power to prove to the band and to Warner Brothers that I was worthy of the position of manager. I figured that whatever I might have lacked in experience, I could compensate for through tireless effort and diligence. Indeed, I never worked so hard in my life as I did in 1979, and yet I recall that period with enormous fondness. We were traveling the world, mostly first class and playing sold-out venues, mostly 8,000 seats or smaller, to ensure as little deadwood as possible in the theater, in front of adoring fans. In many ways, I couldn't believe my good fortune. After so many years working in the music business, struggling to make a living with acts that had a shelf life of only a few months, I had hit the jackpot. There was no way I was going to this up. If it meant working round the clock without a contract or with a 30-day contract, then that's what I would do. From New York to LA, from London to Tokyo, we played and worked as hard as we could, burning the candle at both ends for weeks and months on end. Every city, it seemed, brought a new and memorable experience. In Tokyo, for example, we were struck by the way the fans remained seated throughout the show. Apparently, some years earlier, there had been an unfortunate incident during a concert, a barrier falling and kids rushing the stage that had resulted in serious injury to several concert goers. As a result, an ordinance had been put in place dictating that fans remain seated throughout subsequent shows. I'm not sure how long this lasted, but it was definitely in effect when Van Halen played in 1979. It was an amazing sight. The band playing its guts out and fans screaming uncontrollably while remaining tethered to their seats. And it wasn't like a throng of baton-wielding security officers was required to maintain this environment. The kids knew what was expected and adhered to the policy without the need for strong-arm tactics. The Japanese leg of the tour lasted only 10 days. We returned to the States in the middle of September for a final North American leg, which ended spectacularly with a sold-out show at the Forum in Inglewood. This was the stamp of success for the boys from Pasadena. To return home as a headliner at the biggest indoor venue in LA and to kick ass in front of hundreds of friends and family members and record label executives. It was the perfect ending to a transformative year. By this time, Van Halen was a legitimate superstar entity, and its members began acting and spending accordingly. First, we paid back everything we owed Warner Brothers from the previous year. Then the guys picked up trinkets large and small, new homes for themselves and their parents, clothes and jewelry for girlfriends, and cars, lots of cars. Edward got his first Porsche. David got a Mercedes. I even went to the dealership with him to close the deal. Not because I wanted to tag along, but because David asked me to help him. He had never bought a car by himself, and he wanted to make sure it was done properly. I didn't mind in the least, but I didn't understand why he later insisted on emblazoning such a fine automobile with a skull and crossbones. There's no accounting for taste. Life was good for the guys in Van Halen, and it was about to get a whole lot better. By the time I met with Mo Austin and David Berman, WB's legal counsel, ostensibly to discuss the state of Van Halen and contractual details for the band's next two albums, a rather extraordinary thing had happened. The deadline for Warner Brothers to exercise its option, and thereby extend its stranglehold on the band, had come and gone. I knew it, and so did Barry, the band's lawyer, but no one else did. I could barely control myself when I walked into Mo's office. The four of us sat around a table and began chatting amiably and superficially about the hottest young band in the WB stable and how exciting it was to be a part of it all. Obviously they were happy. Van Halen was making everyone rich, and Mo figured he was going to have the band locked up forever in a wondrous deal. But I had a surprise for him. Mo, I have to tell you something important, I said, trying to sound concerned and professional rather than giddy with satisfaction. What's that, Noel? Warner dropped the option to our next album. I paused. And the one after that. And the one after that. Mo was a powerful man, not easily shaken or intimidated. I'm sure he thought I was completely full of... After all, he had David right there with him, his legal eagle, and I'm betting he thought he had Barry in his pocket, working both sides of the street as it were. Surely Barry would have known that the option deadline was approaching and made sure that Warner Brothers brass were alerted. Right? Wrong. I looked at Barry, who was staring at the table, nervously rubbing his palms together. I looked at David, who was silent and ashen-faced, and then I looked at Mo. It's true, Mo. We're free agents now. Mo bristled. His face turned red. Listen, Noel, you are a new manager. You don't know what you're talking about. Now sit the back down in your seat and shut the up. And I sat in my chair and I shut up. Mo was no man to toy with. Still, this was an extraordinary development in the life of Van Halen, one owing to luck and timing and a degree of incompetence and maybe just a bit of karma. All that was required for Warner to be protected and to have Van Halen at a bargain rate forever was for someone to place a tickler in the band's file, a reminder that a crucial date was on the horizon. Maybe this never happened. Maybe somebody didn't notice. Maybe my simple little strategy of throwing sand in their faces had worked. Maybe this was cosmic payback for screwing the band in the first place. Regardless, that critical day came and went without Warner Brothers exercising its option. It was a catastrophic mistake. I was now the manager of a spectacularly valuable commodity and free to offer their services to the highest bidder. The next day I met with the band. We sat around and talked over beers, and I explained to them what had happened. You wanted me to break the contract? Well, I broke it. There was silence. Finally, after a few moments, David laughed out loud. Holy! No, you're kidding. I shook my head. I smiled. I don't joke about that kind of money, David, and we're talking about a lot of money. What does this mean? Edward said, his voice and demeanor confused more than anything else. It means you just bought your parents a new house, right? Well, now you can buy them a mansion. You can buy whatever the you want. We will double your income. By the end of the year, we had a new multi-record deal with Warner Brothers. Van Halen remained with the label, but at a royalty rate roughly twice as lucrative as the one it had gotten in the first contract. It's not an exaggeration to say that with one broad stroke, which would have a ripple effect for decades, I made the band tens of millions of dollars. This was the greatest achievement of my professional life. It made the band members instant multimillionaires, and they legitimately appreciated it, at least for a while. Well, that's the end of Chapter 9. Let me know what you thought of Chapter 9 in the comments below. Before I go, I want to give a special shout out to my supporters on Patreon, Matt and Stacy from Canada. That does it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate the support. I'll see you next time. Till then, rock on.